how we use the first time that I've worked for a web-based system. And I've been with AppDynamics now for about 3 months. Finally, time together and going through public speaking at a social doc. So I told him before, none of you working on eye contact and food stuff. Okay, so why don't we go around the remote there? I know everybody's been in a different time. I don't know if you guys all know each other, but introduce yourself, tell everybody what you do, who you work for, and why you are good. Sure. I'm Wayne Minty. I'm a RedHat middleware solutions architect. I've been with RedHat about 5 years now. But I'm interested in coming tonight primarily because one of our products is OpenShift. So I'm interested to see what's going on in AppDynamics. I'm Ryan Weaver. I'm a technical sales rep for AppDynamics, and I'm actually curious to understand a little bit more about the OpenShift side of AppDynamics and AppDynamics very well, but I'm not that familiar with it. I'm a solution developer. I'm a deputy developer for everything. And trying to talk to platform to cloud. I'm trying to touch a bit as much information as I can. I'm both architect and software architect at first. I tried to get everything into something like OpenShift as I think done in general for them. Because we have platforms, we're actually a cloud company, and we're not using any of our own cloud infrastructure, and we've got a lot of job for that. So having that done is amazing. I'd like to see us move from that just to a cloud platform that figure OpenShift would be kind of a good fit for us, because we already have a relationship with RedHat, because we have Linux on virtualized servers. So I'm trying to get them to take some interest in it. So I put out the demo to yeah. Yeah. Yes, I'm Dave Mckenny. I am a solution architect and a RedHat, and my area of work is OpenShift. I support super complex kernel. I just joined the type as a full concept, so I'm just finishing up my training at this time. I was basically the IT student for and I love technology, and I love open source, and basically I don't know much about open source. So I'm Bobby Smith. I'm a developer manager at Bonnie's Business Solutions, formerly Velocity, that's acquired. And I've worked on scaling our infrastructure across ECP. And we just recently signed up with you guys, and I think we just signed up a contract with Shutterstock, so we just do something networking. I'm interested in AppDynamics and what we're deploying for, so that's great. So, hopefully you're making stuff. And I get and I think for everybody, so this is supposed to be kind of a fun, informal event. So we'll try to keep it to about an hour. But if you have questions, if you want to go into things, do it. So, not a type I want to quick stage for why I think a lot of times, I've taken quite a few I've gotten different a lot of them can be very technical and very self-focused, but one of the really important things when deploying software is how do we manage it, right? Not just about how do we write the one engineer, but how do we actually operationalize it, right? How do we be successful to our customers? So there's a quote that you guys may not have seen before about market vision to one of the founders of dedicated luminary personality, very important to capitalist, one number very important to forward. And he said, before software is leading the world. And kind of what that means, you know, in summary is that the businesses are exploring their value proposition for this software. More and more into, you know, the companies really capitalizing on the capabilities of data cognition. So the example that a lot of people use, and it's been around for a little while, but it's very relevant, is Blockbuster, right? So how many people used to rent movies at Blockbuster? I do. Right? How many people still rent movies at Blockbuster? Right? So how many people know where a Blockbuster is? Right? So you take a company like Netflix, right? They didn't just raise Blockbuster, they put them out of they're gone. And you know, what that is a company whose value proposition is delivering something similar but in a very different way. Right? Delivering TV and movies, and instead of having to go to that brick and mortar store, delivering an experience straight to you. Like the CEO of Blockbuster told me that he just said, you know, hey, you ever seen Netflix? You just got this really southern accent. The story's a lot funny when you tell it. But have you ever seen these Netflix guys? Are you worried about them at all? And the Blockbuster's like, yeah, not really. He said, you know, well, we've got enough experience to come into our store on a Friday night and get all your family in and figure out what movie you want to rent and you go home and you know, it's great there. Netflix can never replicate that. And you go, oh yeah, that sounds great. And he said, well, you're really thinking of this guy's thinking, you know, I hate going to the Blockbuster. You know, I gotta get in my car, I gotta drive there, we all fight about what movie we want to watch. And you know, and it's doing something nobody ever wants, and it's late, I gotta pay all these returns to install. So the ability to fundamentally change that experience, to you know, open up Apple TV, open up a smart TV, and stream movies straight to your desktop in real time. Right? That's what we talk about. It's value proposition of the software defined business. So now we're going on. Here you got to, you know, kind of thousands of previous buzzwords these days, but you know, I like to define concepts when we have conversations before. So what is a cloud? So a cloud really is a computing model. Right? It's a model of on-demand data processing that can be readily created to do. So one of the fundamental advantages of deploying the cloud is a little hard to do. So this is your classic model. Right? You got your on-premise you got a resource that you're deploying. Let's say your AppDynamics self-handles the load line, and you know that every Friday night you've got 150. I'm sorry, handles the items. Every Friday night you need to be able to sell 150 handles from there. Right? You position your servers all the way up here to be able to support that. You probably do, you know, a couple percentage points over and above that PhD. So you can support, you know, maybe 10% over your max capacity. Right? Then on Sunday mornings, when all the pirates are out chasing after those runners, nobody's buying them, then your sand drops go down. Right? So all of that over-provisioned IT infrastructure is gone away. So the model of cloud computing is all about on-demand elastic scalability. Right? So Friday night, I come in about 150 handles per minute. Your environment elastically grows to support that demand. And Sunday morning, when they're out pushing at the river on it, right, again, stuff back down. So as you need computing power, you get it, and you don't, you give it back. It's also just potentially very financial model goes CapEx for OpEx. What is operational expenditures? So, you know, writing giant checks right out front, I need $1 million worth of hardware, or you know, right up front to, you know, this month I'm going to consume $2,000.
In addition to this, there are a lot of companies that capitalize not that. I think it's the cost, even the throughput because the market is software, right? It's companies are changing their models for that very reason, because we can definitely do that.
So infrastructure as a service
is, the cloud is computing, it's a model for computing. Infrastructure as a service is the capability to deliver that compute power to the user. Right? So it's the ability to log into EC2, spin up a small, medium, or large AMI, be up and running, on-demand self-service. You don't own the resources that you very easily get to them. Platform as a service comes into play is it's the automation of the application stacks in an elastic cloud environment. So you've got your cloud computing model, just delivering the infrastructure as a service. Now I need my application to run. So what do I need? I need JBoss, maybe I need MongoDB, maybe I need Postgres, maybe I need a JVM, maybe I need Node.js, whatever it is. What are the stacks that I need to get my application up and running? Right? So it's a layer of technology. So you've got your cloud as your model, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, your application code is running on top of that. And that's the whole RedHat definition. What they do. So why go to work platform as a service, right? Why, other than it's cool and it's neat and we can scale and there's technical implications for doing that. One of the main drivers is actually developer productivity. And kind of a tangential story, but related. So at PayPal, we were going under a big technology shift ourselves, and we were going fundamentally from developing new technology in Java to very Node.js focused. So one of the ways that they made that decision is they spun off a pilot project where they were looking at deploying Node.js in the web tier. There's all sorts of performance implications of I've got this asynchronous processing model with Node, which is not quite as easily replicated in Java, so I can leverage the existing hardware that I have more efficiently. So what they did was they built this application side by side, one in Node.js, one in Java, and then they looked at the experience of how that went, what was the cost, what was the quality, all of this, and they used that as a model to make this decision forward. Do we continue to invest in Node as an emerging technology, or do we stick with Java? And everybody kind of expected that one of the problems they would have is that Node.js was this highly performant, highly asynchronous programming language. Things would just screw you, right? Because that's the way some of the big companies out there have solved some of their scalability and performance problems. And what they actually found was the biggest gain that they got was developer productivity. So with Node.js, they developed an application 33% faster with about 33% less developers and overall 40% less lines of code. And from an organizational standpoint, that was actually the big win. It's that efficiency, that streamlining of development effort, that cost savings. And that's one of the big wins for PaaS, right? Because if you think about it, what do application developers like to do? What are they really good at? They like to write code. And if you're a developer, one of your favorite things to do is to write code. And probably one thing you don't want to do is release management or deployment or middleware configuration. It's not as fun if you're a guy that wants to work on emerging technology or develop a new capability, right? You want to figure out how you're going to get Netflix to deliver its solutions faster and in great innovative ways. You don't necessarily want to be bothered with figuring and administering a JBoss. Right? So that PaaS is a huge capability from streamlining organizational standpoint. Okay. So some of the challenges of when we get into this more efficient, more mature, but so we already know Andrews has told us the software is in the world. We know that software-defined businesses are digitizing their goods, and we've got this big shift to push everything. Technology has changed as well. You think about a user before used to go to the library, and if the book wasn't available, I'll just go back 2 weeks later and check it out, right? But now the Netflix model is I want my goods there right away. Right? I want everything accessible right now to me when I want it. And if it's not there, if that's not available to be delivered, then I go somewhere else. So my revenue is dependent upon those goods being available when I want, how I want. Right? So this is the old model of computing. So you have an end user that comes in across the network. Maybe you've got a web server, you've got some backend services, and you've got your Oracle database, right? And when you shift to the cloud, what a lot of times ends up happening is the functionality starts to become decoupled, right? And you look at modularity, and you look at, well, what kind of costs can I leverage to really achieve this more efficient, more mature solution? Maybe I need caching, maybe I need memcache, maybe I need, maybe I have big data, maybe I have a NoSQL solution, maybe I made an acquisition and now I am interfacing with some sort of legacy technology. So naturally and organically, technology is getting more complex to deploy and to implement. It's getting more complex to manage, right? So if you look at this picture, you look at this one, you say, well, if something breaks, right, there's still, about 8 to 10 machines that I can jump to try to figure out the problem. How are you going to figure out a problem in this environment? Inherently more complex, and that's where APM comes into play. So it's harder in the cloud because by design, it's more complex. It's also elastic. Right? Cloud computing model, we know, is elastic. So we've got machines that are spinning up, they're spinning down. I'm happy. I've got 3 servers one minute, I've got 5 servers the next, 15 the next, then maybe I've got 1 the next. So how do you know at any point in time how many virtual assets are you actually have? And how do you triage and manage all of those? Out of the box, a lot of the monitoring is focused on infrastructure. So things like how many connections do I handle? Right? And that's one of the things that Chip uses to define their elasticity policies up front. So I have a capacity of connections that I can handle. As I start to reach that threshold, let me elastically scale my environment and spin up new machines and capabilities. Good technology, right? But a lot of that is built around infrastructure. Access and privileges. So this is something that we work with customers on a regular basis. And we do have some customers that are running OpenShift right now. And access and privileges can be part of it in a cloud environment. Right? It's not as easy just to log into the box and see what's happening. And finally, dev tools, and this isn't necessarily just a cloud thing, but with the complexity of a cloud environment, you go from having 10 machines to 100 to 1,000 machines. Dev tools just don't work as well. Right? So if you're using things like Visual VM or JConsole or generic profilers, maybe you've got to log into the machine, maybe you're attaching over JMX. If you're doing JMX or JBoss, you've got to get to that management console. Is that port available? You've got all these issues. And if you've got to bounce to JVM to a profiler, probably also already lost the ability to solve the problem. Okay. So John Martin, who is the senior director at Edmunds.com, and I think this was an interesting quote. So applications. So applications are applications on Edmunds.com. The application has been created with the assumption that they're already available. It makes it difficult to imagine what the remedy to identify the problem is. So I don't know what your experience is, but mine in development shops, the primary goal of development organizations is to build functionality. Okay, that's what developers like to build functionality. And non-functional requirements, security, performance, quality, they always want to deliver that, but it's a secondary, not tertiary concern. Right? So they build thinking that it's always going to work, right? And it doesn't always work, not all the time. And when it doesn't work, and it's performance or capacity related, it usually doesn't work in a good way. Right? So you think about fundamentally not being able to handle the capacity or not being able to understand when something is broken as a performance standpoint. Hey, it's not working. I have no idea what's happening, right? Those are catastrophic failures, and they have really big implications. Okay, so we're almost through the slides. So, how mature are you? So, how often do you guys think about monitoring and management in your day-to-day, or even week-to-week roles? A little bit? At all? Not at all? Okay. So here's our completely unofficial APM maturity model. So level 0, right? This is, and I've worked with people like this, and maybe you guys have too, or maybe you are like this. But your users call up and they tell you that something's broken, and then you're like, really? Broken? Let me get online. Let me run top. My CPU's at 25%. That's pretty good. Can't really figure out what's happening, right? And then they're like, well, I think Bill was on the system last night. I'm pretty sure it changed something like that. Right? And then everybody starts. Let me see the log files. Let's all get the log files. Right? Let's get every single machine and get log files. And then people start saying, nope, let's get the DBA, or let's get the network guy. And it's a mess. And so this is, we don't solve problems this way. Or if you do solve problems, it takes forever. All right, so level 1. So you go from having nothing to everything, right? You've got tons of homegrown tools. You've got lots of tools with lots of data. They don't really have any information. There's no clarity of what's happening in my environment. So has anybody ever heard the term Franken monitor? Yeah, so what Franken monitor is when you know about something, and you know about something, and you know about something, and you all build tools yourself to solve that one specific problem. So let's say that you're an infrastructure guy, you're a database guy, and you're a network guy, and you're an application guy, and you're a Splunk guy, and you're whatever guy, right? And you all go out and build your own tool. Now something happens, and what each one of you does is you flock to the tool that you know, and you can't get a single cohesive picture about what's happening. You've got tons and tons of data, but really no clarity. Right? Anybody ever work with an operations team? Yeah. Have you experienced alert storing?
Here we get like 1,000 emails. That one like 9
Yeah, it could be easily. So I'll tell you a story about working with US Customs. It was about 8 years ago, and we were rolling out a transaction tracing capability that at the time was developed pretty cutting edge. And it's going to give you the ability to go from an inspector's workstation anywhere in the country, so one mouse click, starting measurement, trace that transaction end to end for a pretty complex distributed environment, and pretty close to source line code. Not exactly on line code, but pretty close. So we had this whole thing built out basically, and we went into the operations center. We were kind of like asking somebody questions like, do you think this would be neat? And like, what if you could do this? And we were expecting them to kind of say, oh yeah, that would be awesome. So this one guy, he raised his hand. He goes, wait. He said, could you make it so I could right click on my screen and I could delete all these alerts? And he's like, did we get like 1,000, 10,000 alerts? I have no idea what's going on. He said, I can't handle that. You get this overload of data. You can't, there's nothing you can do with it. And so we were like, yeah, you don't solve that problem. You can't do it. We think that our solution is going to help you get less alerts, but we don't provide the right problem. And then some other guy. This other guy raised his hand because he goes, yeah, I work the night shift a lot, so I'm up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And when things happen, he's like, I call all these people and nobody picks up their phone. He's like, I just can't figure out what's going on. So if you guys give like an updated phone list, that would be great. And we're like, yeah, we don't solve that problem yet. So performance charts, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but again, US Customs, they had a team where you get submit a trouble ticket and somebody would go off and go to the performance chart. And what you end up with is tons and tons and tons of performance charts. Alright, so level 2. So this is where people typically that implement an APM system like AppDynamics. This is typically where it is. Right? Yep, it looks like it's logging transactions out of your CPM. I can see it's a mid-tier authentication service, trying to get a data extension out of the pool. Right? So very clear understanding of what was the business functionality that was impacted, when did it happen, when was it resolved, and what's the underlying root cause of that problem. So clarity across the environment and link back to business performance. And then there's level 3. And frankly, I haven't worked with a lot of these guys, but this is where the industry is headed. Right? The ability to have that level 2, right? Level 2 capability, I know exactly what happened, But I also now have integrated my runbook automation through the APM solution. What that means is that I can say things like my login is failing, I am out of connections in my database pool, so let me take that JVM offline, let me run a script that reconfigures my pool, increases my capacity, restarts the JVM, and now it's back in service. With the integration of runbook automation with APM. And that's something that is happening more and more. Not everyone is that mature, but that's kind of the goal. Okay. So let's talk about technology. So there's a lot of people here. Who hasn't ever seen OpenShift before? Okay. So I know there's people with different levels of experience, and I'm sure many of you have much more experience with the platform than I do. But I will walk you through my experience as someone who has experience, is an experienced software developer, but hasn't worked exclusively or in a ton of detail with OpenShift. But with the goal of I want to deploy an app, I want to deploy a real app very quickly. But from my perspective, what I want to do is really have experience management, visibility, insight into what's happening in my app. So what we would do, here's my Shift Online portal. And first thing I would do is I would add an application. Okay? So I'm going to come by and say, well, what kind of application do I want to add? Right? My application is going to run on top of JBoss. So let's go ahead and find JBoss. And right there we can see JBoss application set. So that looks like it's going to be good. We give it a public URL. One thing I've already done at this point is I created a domain within OpenShift. So I've got my app view tickets domain. So I'm creating a new app that's going to be JBoss AS tickets. I've got a Git repository that already has my source code. So I can come over here and I can say, get my ticket monster, Git repo. That's my branch. I'm going to get a small gear because I've got the online free plan, and I'm going to have scale. So as web traffic increases against my application, I'm saying that I want OpenShift to automatically, elastically scale my application. And I would create this. Oops. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff happening in the background. I'm not really sure what it's doing. And from my perspective, I don't really care. Right? I'm getting a platform where I'm going to deploy my application code. I'm an application developer, and it's automating all of these things that it needs to do so I can deploy my application. What happens, and this is all said and done, I've created my app. Now it's going to come by and say, okay, here you go. So I cloned the repo. If you want to bring that back into your environment and make any changes to it, here's where you can go and get it. Here's where you can go and get it. All right, so I've got this. I've done a git clone, so I did git clone and I pasted in the repository URL. I cloned the application back into back onto my local system, right? So I've created this link between my application and OpenShift. So what I really want to do is I want to deploy AppDynamics on top of OpenShift, right? So I already know that I've already got my application up and running. What I want to do is introduce APM. So what I'm going to do now. Right now, AppDynamics does not have an OpenShift cartridge. I think that's something that will probably evolve in the future as we see more demand. But it doesn't really stop me from deploying AppDynamics. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an action hook. So action hooks are the way that you can work yourself or do different things basically, insert yourself into the life cycle of OpenShift. So if you want to do something before the application starts, or before it builds, or after it starts, there's different life cycle events that occur in that application, or different events that occur in that application life cycle, and you can tie into those. So I am using the pre-start application hook, or action hook. And if I looking at that, what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm configuring AppDynamics, right? So AppDynamics has a concept, and I think it'll be pretty clear once you jump into the UI. But there's a logical architecture of applications, tiers, and nodes. So think of your application environment, and you've got an application which is a group of things, and that's what our application is. An application is a group of things. You've got tiers. Take tiers might be you've got a web tier, you've got a services tier, you've got a data tier. You have different tiers. That's what our tiers are. And then our nodes are typically individual servers or JVMs. So node really being down to JVM. Our node ID in the AppDynamics world, all nodes need to be unique within an application. So as OpenShift is elastically scaling out my app and bringing up new nodes, I have to have a unique node ID. So what I've done is I've said my agent node name is going to be equal to the gear UUID. That's an environment variable that OpenShift provides. So using the action hook, I've inserted myself into the life cycle of JBoss coming up to run me. And I said my node name, when it fires up, my node name is going to be based on the gear UUID. And then I've done, this is standard. I have actually, typically when you deploy AppDynamics in an on-premise environment, you put it in a single place on the server. So you might put it in /opt, or you could really put it in directly. It would exist in one place, and then all applications on that server would tie into that deployment. With OpenShift, I'm going to deploy AppDynamics as part of the application. So relative to the OpenShift repository directory, I've copied the app server agent, and one of the Java options that I'm going to add is -Java agent and Java agent -jar. Okay. Any questions on how that is constructed?
Yeah, this script is pretty so that's something that you had to build as part of the Git project, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this does live.
I mean, that doesn't ship with OpenShift,
right?
Environment or cartridge or whatever.
Right. So after I created that app and then I cloned the code down, there was no action hooks created one. So I went in there, I created the .OpenShift action hooks. I created the pre-start JBoss AS7.
Will the action hooks directory exist? Oh, okay.
Can you open that again?
Mm-hmm.
So it's referring to the Java agent jar.
Yes.
What is that? Is that the jar file that comes with AppDynamics? Or?
Yeah. So really, what the AppDynamics agent is it's a jar file with a set of configuration.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of XML files that tell the jar file, what to instrument, what things we want to monitor. And so what typically you would see /opt/AppDynamics agent. So all we've done is we've taken that installation and just copied it into our application.
And how are we supplying that? I mean, how are we checking in that Java agent.jar into the Git repository that we have?
Yes.
Is that something you can are you using Maven to build it?
Yes.
Is that Maven?
That's not Maven dependency.
So in that pre-start script, we're actually pointing to this location, AppServer agent /Java agent.
Yeah, and we use so we say OpenShift repository directory, wherever that might be. I don't know where OpenShift is going to deploy OpenShift, but wherever that is, I know that there's AppServer agent and Java agent there. So I'm going to. That's how we enable AppDynamics.
So if I want to add AppDynamics to my existing application, I need to not only add the script but also the the folder inside my application.
Yes.
What is that second line? The export.
Yeah, so when
you split verify.
there were some changes to class loader with AS7, and that's just an additional configuration that we need so that AppDynamics has visibility to all the classes that are provided. So we use different techniques to automatically discover what transactions are existing in the system, and then also to be able to provide source line code diagnostics. One of those ways is by doing computation. That's a smaller subset of what we do, but that's one of the things.
Was the fourth line.
That's interesting. That came out of our AppDynamics quick start for OpenShift. And I haven't got a clear answer from Dustin as to why the socket. Yeah. Dustin Little is one of our technology analysts. That's not something that I typically use, and it's not clear. Most likely it can be taken out. I'm not sure. Okay, so does that make sense? So you create the application. Once you've got the application, you need a way to bootstrap AppDynamics so it is capable of monitoring, right? What AppDynamics is going to do is on startup, it's going to start monitoring your app. As transactions come in, it will discover them and it will map them end to end across your enterprise, right? So if you go back to that really complex cloud diagram, AppDynamics has a flow map that would essentially reproduce that diagram. We'll see that in a second. But we need a way to bootstrap ourselves into the startup. We are running as part of the application. That's how we get that deep visibility. How we get source line code visibility. So we need a way to bootstrap AppDynamics as part of the app.
I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but let me answer the question, and if you're going to cover, then you can.
Okay.
You talked about tiers.
Yeah.
And then the nodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tiers are the web tier, app server, database tier, and things like that. And the nodes are, in this case, the gates where the application is actually running, or the database is actually running.
Right.
So, looking at this code, it appears that AppDynamics is only going to monitor the gates where the application is running. Let's say if I have a database, MySQL, running on a different tier, we are not configuring to that. Does it not monitor the gate which has the database, or is that something that we're going to do?
Yeah. So let's take a look at what actually happens. Well, I've got it.
Does that have a database?
This is using H2. So I'm using the token. And I think that there is an option to deploy this along with MySQL, either MySQL or Postgres. But I didn't go through that step. But from an AppDynamics perspective, it would look the same. So what I would do within my app is I would say, all right, so I made these changes, and then I would do. Yeah, so it doesn't matter to us. Right.
Okay. So you would be pulling this up from the JDB side, PC side, then, right? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, and one of the things that I usually try to do, I go to JBoss or user groups. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about just what I've done. We can get into that certainly as much as you guys want. But we have different levels, different capabilities for monitoring. We have an application agent, we have a database agent, we have end user monitoring. So very much an end-to-end management capability. From the application side, we will see all the calls to the backend database, whether that's MongoDB, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, whatever it might be. By running in the app, we'll see that you're calling this external system. We do also have database agents, so if you want the next level of visibility, we can give you that. But it's a slightly different technology.
So did you try that on the OpenShift? That's one of the database agent on OpenShift.
I haven't, not yet.
When I say you, I'm talking about the AppDynamics.
So just to be clear, the database is actually not an agent, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than the technology that Steve's talking about. It's actually a collector. But nobody wants to install agents on the databases. You talk to a DBA and say, hey, I want to put the database. Say, hell no, absolutely not. So it works a little bit differently. And the difference in how it works wouldn't necessarily apply, because you would basically just have a collector pulling the information from the data that sits in OpenShift, right?
So the question that I was asking is, in a scaled application, like the one that we just created, if you are adding a database cartridge, it would get deployed on a separate page, right? So can we add this database agent from AppDynamics as a monitor for that gear by using a similar exercise like adding a line to the script? That was the question.
So the answer is, it's always yeah. So the answer is yes. However, the caveat is that I haven't done it. Right. So we would do it the same way we do the app agent. Right. We would look at an action hook that said, let me figure out how to determine where that gear is running and get that configuration that I need to the collector so that I can then monitor that database. And I think that that's, again, that's an exercise that we would go through based upon. Right now I don't have a prospect or a customer that's looking to do that. Right. So as far as just spinning up a demo of AppDynamics and OpenShift, I do that. No, that makes sense. So out of the box, we've got our ticket monster running. It's running JBoss. It fires up. So we created our action hook. We pop it over the app server agent, which is available. You can download that now. You can go to appdynamics.com. You can download the app agent, put that in your application repository. Then you do your git commit, and everything is immediately pushed back to OpenShift. OpenShift restarts JBoss, and then what we get out of the box is now we can see the application environment. So I've got a JMeter script that's pushing some load through. You can see, yep, it's still running. So I've got different response codes and here's what performance is over a period of time.
Question.
It's still up and running. Yes.
After you configuring on OpenShift, do you need to do anything on AppDynamics side? Is it like an account you have to set up?
So what I did is I'm pointing to the AppDynamics has two parts. You have an agent, you have a server. We call it a controller. You take the agent and you point it to the controller. So within the
Where do you run the controller on OpenShift?
you can run it anywhere you want. We have a SaaS and an on-premise deployment model. In this example, I've spun up an instance in a SaaS environment. So this is there's a configuration file that comes along with every agent, and it says where is the controller host, right? So in this case, my controller host is jbookdemo.saas.com. So the agent knows the agent is going to communicate all of its data to that server, initiating all of the connections from the agent to the server. And this is where the server lives. And the controller port is 443.
Okay, so it's going over the open internet encrypted.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
How difficult is it to set up this server on OpenShift if you want to have a separate gear for?
Yeah, we want here's where
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I've never done it before. Typically, I don't know if OpenShift would be the best place. So we would want some amount of dedicated and well understood amount of resources for the AppDynamics controller, especially depending on how large the resource the environment is. So that would be one of the big concerns that you would want to deal with is the controller itself is not really something you want to elastically grow. The AppDynamics deployment model is you actually have one controller for up to, we have customers that are running up to 15,000 nodes. They're being monitored and managed by a single controller. So the elasticity of a controller is not really a concern.
Yeah, but you can get a big hit, right?
Yeah.
You can get one with a lot of RAM on the CPU.
Right. So if that's just something that you wanted to do and that's what it made sense, then yeah. I mean, so from that perspective, I don't think there wouldn't be something fundamentally different about logging into an OpenShift gear that was really big and installing a controller. And at the end of the day, it's a virtual machine.
I was thinking in that direction because, for example, for continuous integration, we have a Jenkins package. When we deploy Jenkins on OpenShift, it uses its own gear. Using the same Jenkins, you can control multiple applications, just like how AppDynamics works.
Okay, yeah.
Will control multiple applications. Okay. So you can build n number of applications using the same instance of Jenkins, and each application will have a Jenkins agent.
Right.
Right? The same model can be applied here. So I was asking, actually, right.
So my question is, if you were to do that, wouldn't have all your applications have to be within OpenShift?
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
If you had.
If you put the controller in OpenShift.
Yeah, so the only requirement in order to enable this is that you have an agent, you have a controller, there's n number of agents for a single controller. The only requirement is the agent needs to be able to initiate an outbound connection to your controller. Your controller is running an OpenShift, and I can hit that either through a VIP or through some other proxy, right? If I can get to that controller, then I can run my agent anywhere.
And what channel of communication will it use? Is it some messaging or HTTP or what kind of? How does the agent talk to the controller?
It's a socket request.
Yeah, it was just showing us 442.
Oh,
Yeah,
so that's
you can run it either in unencrypted or encrypted. Our SSL, our SaaS deployments are typically run with SSL.
How do you deploy? Okay, let's say I forget about OpenShift for just a second. Let's say I just run my own data center and I run JBoss and blah, blah, blah. How do I deploy AppDynamics? Is it just a work file?
So this is what AppDynamics, this is what the agent is.
I guess it's not the agent I'm talking about the controller.
The controller.
Yeah, how would I deploy the controller?
So the controller setup once up front. You get you deliver as a the tar file. There's a shell script that you can run. If you're doing a Windows, there's a Windows installation script. It's a fully self-contained application.
Okay.
Under the covers, the controller itself is a web application. It runs on top of JBoss. It's got an internal data repository. But from an installation standpoint, it's either a shell script or a Windows installation.
So it's probably a work file.
Well, I mean, it's multiple things. The controller application, there is application code running in Glassfish. The controller really is the superset of the controller app as well as the data repository and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. One of my big gripes about OpenShift is that you have to use Git before, and it doesn't seem like there's at least with online version, there's no way to support a war file.
They have actually deploying the WAR file itself as section. You can also deploy a WAR file. You don't have to build inside OpenShift.
Okay.
I need to check on how that is done, but I can. Yeah.
So this is actually deployed with that model. So I had pre-built the ticket system, and then I took the WAR file that was built. So it's built from it's management from and I built it. Then I go into my target and I copy the WAR file into your application / deployments. And this is the WAR file that OpenShift is.
So you push that war, correct? Don't you push that war into the Git repository and the deploy?
Which war are you talking about? The root war? Is that the application or what is it?
This is the ticket application. This is what when I do a git commit and git push.
Yeah.
This is the application. I'm not actually rebuilding.
That's the ticket master application.
This is the ticket. Yeah. So in my model, and you can do it different ways. In this model, I pre-built the app. I took the war. I dropped it into / deployments.
Okay.
And now every time I do git push,
right.
OpenShift takes this and deploys it.
Yeah. I guess one thing I was looking for is why doesn't OpenShift just have like a nice like when I deploy Glassfish using GUI, I can just drop a war. It doesn't care how it got there. I'm not forced to use Git. Although I'm not saying Git is bad, but Git is fine. But like at Earthline, we're using Subversion and CDS still. So in order for us to get OpenShift, that's another big sales pitch I have to do is we need to move to Git and all this other stuff because the infrastructure is roll up.
Actually, we can talk on.
Okay.
You can use as
We can use this, right?
but it's not like you just you have to do something. Yeah, it's better.
So I try to not to run too late, but I did want to kind of walk you guys through some of the capabilities. So as the transactions are coming in, All right, I've got my load generated. I know you got it.
Yeah, I was like,
Good night, folks.
Right, so we're pumping transactions through, we've got different classes of transactions. And what AppDynamics does, so all I've done from AppDynamics perspective is that I've basically added those. So I said dash J Java agent AppDynamics.jar. Right, so when JBoss fires up, now it's a part of the application environment, and that's the only thing that I did. I fired up my JMeter script. I'm pushing load against the application. So what AppDynamics does is it discovers what's running in your system. So it sees your ticketing app. In this case, it saw that OpenShift actually scaled out on years over a period of time. So I'm looking at the last day, right? So I can see all of the different nodes that OpenShift has elastically scaled over that period of time. Every time OpenShift elastically scales the environment, right, AppDynamics automatically recognizes that node. So it brings it into,
Because it's RSMP over.
yep. Yep. So I've got my tier, my logical flow is that I've got an application. It's called Ticket Monster. Click on Ticket Monster. I can see that I've got a tickets tier, and I can see all the nodes within my tier. As transactions come in, we discover the transactions. We discover how they come in, and also what they're calling the backend. So I'm not really sure what deal that Dropbox is, but this right here is my HTTP database.
I think that is within OpenShift.
Yeah.
The tickets is running JBoss.
Tickets is running in JBoss.
Okay.
So I see that as transactions come in, one of the things that I do is I integrate with this backend system dl.dropbox.com over port 80, and I've got an H2 database, so I'm making some calls. I'm either inserting or I'm querying from those calls. All right, so we discover what transactions are in the environment, and we create a map showing how they all talk end to end. You had multiple tiers for your application, so we only have a single tier with tickets. Let's say our tickets was a little bit more complex. You had a web front end that did some service indications to the mid-tier. What you would see is you would see multiple tiers. You would see tickets calling into your mid-tier services, which then call to your back-end data repositories. And so the ability to correlate end-to-end across the environment.
So is this the console on the SaaS environment we have?
This is the AppDynamics. Yes, this is our user interface. This is exactly what you see if you deploy either on-premise or if you leverage the SaaS on the model. It's the same code base, the same functionality.
So that jar file, the Java agent jar, for each specific application, you have to do some specific configurations in the jar file, or how does it recognize all these connections that your application is making to the either databases or external environments?
Like this.
Okay.
Is it using AOP?
I think it's that jar file that you added station, right?
The jar file is essentially the jar file, and then there's some configuration associated that tells the agent exactly what to monitor. But this is all out of the box, right? We haven't done anything. So what happens is, AppDynamics is what we call a smart agent. And I don't know if you guys have used legacy technology before, but take something like Wiley. One of the things that you do with Wiley is, if you say, I want to monitor these methods, you define your instrumentation points in the application, you tell the monitoring tool what to monitor, and it goes off and monitors those methods. This works differently. This discovers, okay, transactions are coming into my application, and essentially what is happening is the AppDynamics has an inventory of all the ways the transactions typically come into and then exit an application. So maybe it's a server endpoint, or maybe it's making a request over SOAP, or maybe there's a RESTful endpoint, or maybe it's JMS, right? So let's take a look really quickly. We'll go back to tickets in a second, but one of the more complex environments.
Who wrote the game? Oh, in cartridge.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know who wrote that. It's all open source, right? So somebody in upstream.
Okay.
most of the commits are done by Red Hat people, so engineers and Red Hat stuff.
Okay.
Even though it is open source. Those are not just
Oh, about the availability of demo work.
They were talking about the custom demo.
Oh,
I haven't been back to it.
okay.
they have something.
Okay. So this is an example. This is a more complex environment. And what we're doing is we're seeing how those transactions come into the application. We're discovering all of the incoming transactions. And then here we have agents on e-commerce inventory order processing. And we use the incoming transactions, our discovery, to map them and then across the environment. We see that e-commerce takes communication across AppDynamics to order processing. That's our mid-tier service. And we have a backend local database.
So could these potentially, if these were like deployed on OpenShift, could these be different OpenShift apps?
They would be, well, they could potentially be different tiers within the same application. So let's say the tickets, instead of being a single monolithic, the work file was split into, you got a web front end, you got a service tier. Right, but it's all working, it's all in a ticketing app. And that's what this is. This is our online bookstore.
Okay.
So it's one application split across multiple tiers and multiple.
Or if you had an ESB that was kind of wiring two different RedHats together to do a composite app.
Right. So our definition of an application is logical, not based upon a process. In that case, we would define that those two things as probably a single application.
Okay.
We would say that these two, we have these two processes, these two applications that we think of as applications, but we want to manage them as a single composite application. We can track them across the database as well.
Okay.
And so our instrumentation allows us to understand how transactions come into the system, how they leave the system, and we correlate, so we do tag and follow, we correlate end-to-end across those application tiers. So we can see things like, okay, e-commerce process order processing, but with the intelligence to understand it's actually an indication across AppDynamics too. And our discovery is when we see every transaction that's in the environment, what we do is we build a baseline. So we can say things like baseline response time for this invocation from e-commerce to our services tier, our baseline is 3 milliseconds. Right? And right now we are trending for the green, so we're right in that normal operating procedure. As we start to deviate away from what's normal, we'll start to score these transactions or these links as either being yellow or red.
Will you have to define that yourself?
Yeah. That's all out of the box.
So what happens is the transactions are coming across, it's timing every single transaction across the classes.
Or you can configure that.
But not everybody has SLAs, and actually, my experience, people that have hard SLAs are not my experience, minority.
So do you have to define every single node, or does it affect everything by itself? Or?
Yeah, it affects everything. So all that I've done is I've installed AppDynamics on e-commerce inventory order processes, and I added that dash Java agent.jar. Man, it's one of my command lines. I restart the JVM and I push load through the system, and AppDynamics sees these tiers talking to each other.
Build the graph. You don't have to build the graph.
You don't have to build the graph. Graph is automatic discovery. And let's say you change something. Let's say that you add another service.
It's showing how screwed up your architecture is, right? If it's right.
That happens all
I'm sure it
all
does.
the time.
Yeah.
People are like, you'll get architects that come in, and I don't mean for architects, but you get developers to come in and like, yeah, it doesn't do that. We had an incident with PayPal where we were talking to an external system with port 80, like, well, not within the PayPal data center, so unencrypted HTTP with port 80.
Okay.
And they were like, no, we don't do that. We don't do that at all.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you
send
think
credit
you
card.
do, you do it, it's right there. They went
Wow.
nuts.
Amazing. How do you group these things logically together? I mean, I noticed you had the OpenShift IE. I mean, how is it grouping?
Oh, there's a couple different ways to do it. One of the ways is in the configuration, the agent config. You can use the agent say.
So if I
One of the ways is you can go into the agent configuration file yourself and say, this tier name is, Ticket Monster. So my application is OpenShift Ticket Monster, and my tier name is Tickets. So that's one thing, right? And then every application that uses this agent configuration will inherit these properties. Another way, I'm sorry, not every JVM. The other way is, within the command line, like I did, within the command line, I said my node name is OpenShift Gear ID.
okay.
And you can do it, so you can, if you have multiple JVMs running on the same server, maybe you want to say this JVM is this tier, this JVM is that tier. Even though they're running on the same server, I want to treat them.
Okay, I see. Yeah, gotcha.
So there's a couple different ways to do it. But once you set up that,
But I can have different tiers talking to that same AppDynamics app that was posted where the controller lives, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
Right. And so we've got our biggest customers for a single controller do up to 15,000 nodes. I've heard we've got something doing over 17,000 for a single controller.
Now, if the controller crashes or one of those monitor agents, it has an issue, is it going to bring down the ticketing app?
No. Well, no.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, it's designed not to be invasive, right? So one of the tenets of there's lots of stuff about AppDynamics that we haven't talked about, but our founder and CEO, JBoss, was the chief architect of Wiley. And when Wiley was acquired by CA, Wiley is a legacy CA capable. He started AppDynamics, and one of the tenets is do no harm, and the other is run the production under full load. Right? So a lot of APM solutions these days, the problem is they overly use bytecode instrumentation. And when you start to say, I want to monitor these 1,000 methods, they actually, the performance tool becomes the performance problem. Right? And so they can't run in production under production load. They become development tools, essentially. So we do things a little bit differently, and we run under full load with about 2% overhead. So as you can imagine, as transactions come in, so we don't go back to the ticket example. Transactions are coming in, we're creating this map, we're saying, okay, this application is talking to these things, and we're building a scorecard. So we can say, here's how healthy your infrastructure is, here's how healthy your business transactions are. Right? And we're grouping requests as business transactions. So based upon some rules that we've set out, we see that we've got a series of RESTful indications, bookings, events, venues, medias, and shows. We're categorizing the incoming requests. You can come in here and you can say, you can actually rename transactions that you further represent your business transaction. You can also configure the instrumentation to say, our instrumentation works depending on what protocol is, what the request is. It uses different rules to name the transaction. You can say things like, what I really want to do is I want to take the first 3 URL, the statement URL, or I want to apply a regular expression, or I want to split transactions on the payloads. There's different things you can do to create this transaction. But out of the box, this is what you get, right? So bookings, events, venues, media, and shows. And for each one of those, you can see over the period of time how many individuals, how many calls you had, what the response time was, and what the health was.
I have a good question for you.
Okay.
So is this thing smart enough to detect who is making that call, or can it see, if you're making a REST call, can it see the basic authentication stuff in the header?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So you can go, by default, we don't capture all of that, and there's PII reasons, and there's, our goal is to capture the right amount of information, which is different for different people.
Okay.
So you can go in the configuration, you can say, give me all the headers, right? Or give me this cookie, give me the session ID. There's different things that you can do, or you can just say, hey, give me everything.
Yeah, because my manager says we have this API, and it's an internal one, and it's getting called a lot. He's like, who's calling us? That sort of stuff.
Yep. So what you would do is you would go into configuration, you would say, either for all, you could do it on a all serverless, or all requests of this category, I want to capture this. Or maybe what you want to do is you say, I want to have a custom rule that says, for this transaction, I want to capture this data. Right? And so what we do is, as transactions, using that baseline technique, and I haven't generated enough data to actually develop a baseline. For baselines out of the box are hour by hour, day by day, week by week. And I can also do custom baselines. We work with NFL.com, once their baseline is Super Bowl. They're constantly measuring current activity against the peak period of the year, which is the Super Bowl. They want to see what the visibility is. They really do that. So we do require, a minimum amount of data you have to have until you get a baseline. So I don't have enough data yet, but what I'm doing is I still have the ability to score transactions. So I can say, based upon what I know is normal, 83% of my transactions over this last day are normal, 1.5 are slow, 13.4% are very slow. I've got 1.6% stalled. So stalled is out of the box 45 seconds or longer. And then I've got errors on 4.1%. So we were talking about sometimes we both experience internal errors with OpenShift, especially generated load. How do you diagnose that?
Actually, mine is the opposite. When there's actually zero load for like weeks, I have problems.
So what you can do is you can say, AppDynamics has kind of different modes of data collection. You use that baseline capability in scoring to say, hey, you're getting away from normal, you're away from good, right? And we score you as either slow, very slow, stalled, or error. Then for those transactions that meet those bad criteria, let's actually capture diagnostic data about those transactions, because those are the ones that we want to go into. You come over here and say, show me all the errors, right? Now you get a list of all of your transactions that have errors. Or maybe what you want to do is you want to start from a business transaction perspective, and you want to look at your bookings. Then you want to understand. All right, so you're looking at bookings and you say, I want to see all the errors for bookings over the last day. So I can click on errors. Now I see all of my bookings transactions that had internal errors. So I can jump down to one of them. This one has a full call stack. Okay, so this is a single transaction. So now I've gone through seeing the application as a whole, all the transactions that went through it, scoring those, understand what's normal, how they deviate away from normal, going in and seeing individual business transactions, and then saying, show me the absolute booking transaction that had this error. And this is it. So this is a real transaction, just one, and this is what happened. You get a flow map of that transaction.
So, if that transaction is accessing database multiple times, is that reflected here, or just you just know that you access database and you should this much time?
Yep. So start at the high level. You see the flow map, right? And you see I got this application and it spent 2.2 seconds calling my backend data. So I can drill down, and now I can see a callback. So within this JVM, I see exactly what happened. And it looks like the time spent here, line 130, and actually what happened was, great booking executed some workload. Got a full connection to the data source and ran here. So those are all of my calls. I can also jump into.
What was that in error?
Yeah.
What was that for error?
Right here I can say.
Look at the timeout.
Timeout time to lock. So I tried to execute this SQL statement. There's different ways to see this, right? So show me all the SQL calls that occurred in the scope of this one transaction. So here's every single SQL call that I executed in this transaction. One of the interesting things is, see, you just sort by count. We've got some redundant calls. So we get a full connection from our data source 6 different times in the scope of one transaction. You can see down here, here's where we had our error. There's a DBC SQL exception, timeout, time to log table, here's the table name, here's the SQL statement. select ID from section allocation routing.
So is it actually monitoring when this transaction is getting started, like by reading the call itself on the start of the database transaction, when it commits or when it goes back and things like that? Like, is it actually reading the call itself, the payload that is going from the app server to the database?
So in this case, we don't have the database installed, so we're not in the database, just on the application side.
Mm-hmm.
So the visibility, what AppDynamics gives you is visibility to see what are all of the calls that I'm making. What external systems do I call? And also what databases do I call?
What is interesting here is that it could recognize all the calls that went in a particular transaction. If that has to happen, it should know when the transaction started and when it ended. So how did it know if it is not reading the actual payload beforehand?
How did it know when the transaction started? Right. So well, payload is contents, right? So I'm gonna send you something, and the something, right? How I send it to you is protocol. So what, the contents of what I send you is payload.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to measure how long it takes to send you something is not measured by payload.
Sure. So we look at calls, the payload was the select statements themselves, and also the database transaction, beginning of the database transaction as part of payload itself. So
I think of that more as context. So what I'm doing is I'm talking to this database, and the contents of my request is the SQL. Right? The payload is be thought of as what the database is returning. Or if you're pushing into the database, the payload might be the objects that you're pushing. But we are on this, our instrumentation is measuring this call, right? I got a JBoss call, I get a connection, I run an insert, I do a select, you see all of those.
Did REST bookings, that REST API, did everything occur within the virtual machine?
So for this one, yes.
Okay.
Right, because I've only got,
So
let's
probably just looking at the, like the stack. I saw he was making a couple of EJB calls.
mm-hmm.
let's look at a more complex example. Okay, so here's a more complex example to check out. So this is the checkout business transaction, and it talks, across our entire application. And so we can see for it, let's look, this is the last 15 minutes. There's not many errors, but there's a few very slow transactions. So we can see the very slow transactions, and we can select one very slow transaction. So now this one checkout transaction, just everywhere it went through the system, ended. So seeing how long it took 10.7 seconds, and for each tier, where was the time spent?
Does it tell you what server, like, order processing is on? That's one issue we have really, just like, what server is this thing running on? Because we have servers spread out all over the place.
Right, so again, picture that flow map. So you got e-commerce talking to order processing and inventory. And so we see here, e-commerce took 10.7 seconds, but most of that, 96% of that time, right here, was spent in outbound web services. So if we click on web service, right, and now we see, okay, I'm calling from e-commerce to inventory. Let me go ahead and drill into my downstream call. Right, so we do tag and follow, so we can trace that transaction from one JVM to the downstream.
Because it left, because it's a web service call. It left that JVM.
Left the JVM, goes to the downstream JVM.
Okay.
So now,
but you're monitoring to drop the downstream also.
right. So we've got the agent both places.
Gotcha. Okay.
If we didn't have the agent on the downstream call, we'd see that as a file. Right? The call is external system.
You know you're waiting, you're blocking.
Right. But you can't get down to the source line of code unless you have the agent.
Gotcha.
So now you're in the downstream tier, inventory, and right, so this is node inventory, so not just tier, but that's the actual machine you're running on. Right? And you can see here that 96.6% of the time was spent on JBoss calls. With JBoss, there's your insert statement. So it took 10 seconds, right, from e-commerce.
So is it flagging the worst abuser of SQL? This insert statement is like the worst guy around.
Yeah, there are reports to say, show me the top bad SQL systems. Yeah. And you can also go into, right, if you get that complete picture of the monitoring, you go in, you can say, well, let's say it wasn't a database call, maybe it's something else, it's not right? Why did that take that long? So then you want to go in, well, what was the infrastructure doing at that point in time, right? So here's where you want to solve that Frankie monitor problem. And you don't just want to have one single stat, one tool. You want to have a comprehensive view of your system. So you want to see how it helped end to end where it flowed.
So you want to see everything.
Right, in a single pane of glass.
So I was going to ask you, like, when you get the phone call that says broke, where did you go? Right? Where should you look? Right.
So does it take a snapshot of that year at that time? Or like, because it's, supposed to scale, when you span more, more service, is this for that particular server, or how does that?
Yeah, so as OpenShift, and you see tickets has 5 nodes. Over the last day, tickets have 5 nodes. If you go over the last 5 minutes, we still have 150 nodes. But you can see which nodes are getting traffic. This node isn't getting traffic. There's actually not a lot of traffic.
So this will go shut down again?
Yeah, over time it will go away. Here's where you can see. So this node is getting traffic. Or you can go come here, you can see all of my nodes. You can see these nodes, these 4 nodes, their app agent status over the last 5 minutes, there's been 0% activity, which means those years are down. And the controller will clean those up after a period of time when they're not actively reporting, they'll be cleaned up. You can see this is the gear that's taking all of the traffic. So jumping back over to, so here's where you see what was my heap like. Right? So inside the APM, what was garbage collection doing at that time? How much time was I spending on GC activity? Right, across the different heap regions, how does that work? I want to jump over to APM. Here's where I can get my APM. Lots of different ways to manage the application, get end-to-end usability. And then it's kind of about, is that level 2, and then we didn't really go into level 3 model, but level 2 model of being able to see, hey, end-to-end, here's how my system works. Here are the transactions that are running. Here's where they go away from normal. Where they go away from normal, you will drill in on those specific business functions, and then understand what happened on the source line code. Right? This failed because I couldn't get a connection, or this failed because of this SQL.
So it looks like you're tracking a lot of data from all these servers, and they're like, how does it have, what's the performance effect of having, that agent?
So that's a really important aspect of the tool, of the platform. It's about 2%. And the way that we do that is there's a couple of different tricks. But the paradigm is really to give you 100% of your transactions that come in. You see them, you discover them, use them to map the system. We use them to collect baseline data, right? So we have 100% visibility, but we don't always do that next level of transaction diagnostics. That is more expensive. We capture those call stacks, get context about the transactions. You don't want to do that for everyone.
Or payload.
Yeah. Right? So payload could be more expensive. So it would be more efficient to say, capture the payload for this class of transactions where I need it, than get payload for everything. Mm-hmm. So other tools will say, I get everything all the time, right? So I have 1 million transactions per hour, I collect everything all the time. Well, what is more expensive? Getting everything all the time, or getting everything for the ones that are bad? So that's fundamentally the AppDynamics approach, is to understand what's normal be able to tell you when things go out of normal, and then when they are out of normal, to be able to collect down the source line for the diagnosis.
So when it's out of normal, does it expect to damage people and
We solve the rest of it. And so we do have health policies. There's lots of aspects of the field. There's alert and respond, there's policies, health rules, actions, runbook automation. So a policy would be to say things like, when I see this condition, peak utilization is over 90%, right? My policy is I send up a critical alert, I fire off an email. Maybe an action is to reset the VM.
okay, you can actually take that.
You can actually take action. So runbook automation is fully integrated with the platform. So you can use all of that information, right, to build health policies and then to integrate your operations playbooks as part of the runbook, automating the runbook. It takes a level of maturity to be able to say, when I see this happen, then
Yeah.
you need that playbook. So the organization has to decide that the right thing to do is bounce the VM or reconfigure the data source. Right? But once you've made that decision, then this automation takes you from, right? It gets you from having to diagnose the problem, automatically recognizing it, and automatically
Replace your option. Right? You could say, hey.
we don't like to tell people. But I mean, some of this, you still want humans,
Sure.
right? And sometimes there's capabilities. So some of the runbook automation is, send email and get approval. Do you want to bounce the
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I do. Right?
And you can bounce it from your phone, like.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's different ways to put humans in the loop, right? So we don't want like a Terminator 2 or Skynet.
Right. Does it come with a machine gun?
Are people using this tool even for performance testing?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the scene. So think about everything you do in production, right? You got a bunch of load coming in. You want to know what's happening when things don't happen, aren't happening up to what you expected. You want to really diagnose the problem. All right. So that's what I was doing in PayPal before.
Okay. It sounds like I could take this thing and figure out what my OpenShift app is having issues. So is there a quick start guide on how to run this on non-OpenShift and OpenShift?
Yeah. So if anybody's interested.
And Ryan, too, if you want to get a demo set up down there, me and Ryan, we can facilitate that here in Atlanta or anywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ryan's the guy.
Yeah, we're an AppDynamics partner, so we're just like we do with the RedHat guys, kind of in tandem. So if you want any further technical, deeper evaluation.
Is everything you've shown, is that part of the open source version, or is that the licensed version?
So we are not an open source product.
Okay.
Right? So we are technology partners with RedHat. They're a great partner of ours. We do a ton of work with them, but it is not an open source product. We do have a freemium model. So there is if you use the product, right, the way it works right now is you'll start out with a fully featured Pro version. Pro version can do things like correlate across multiple VMs, run book policies, and have data retention up to a year. It'll auto downgrade itself into our free version, which is a less featured version of the product. And that's something that's available, but again, the idea is that if you're in a large environment and you need, one of your concerns is I got 100 computers and I need to be able to understand what's happening across all of those. The free version is not going to.
Yeah. So can I try it out on my own?
I saw you have a GitHub sample. Is that open to public? Or?
Yeah, this is just I cloned the Monster project and I built that myself. I had to mess around with the comms a little bit. It didn't build, but I will tell you, it didn't build for me out of the box.
If I gave you my Git project, how hard would it be to fork it or branch it and then add the AppDynamics to it?
Yeah, pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be do that. So I know we're kind of pushing on time. I appreciate you guys. There's a lot of good questions.
Yeah, the small group's been more engaged than most of the bigger ones, so it's been good.
Let me ask you guys this. We started a JBoss user group in Austin, and we're doing this. Ours kicks off on Tuesday. What did you think of the content? This is actually one of the presentations that I'm going to be doing on Tuesday. Is it good?
Yeah, it's relevant. Oh, it's really relevant.
I think one of the things that would have helped me, because I know more about OpenShift,
Yeah.
is if you had talked more about AppDynamics, like on product itself and like how it works and more details. Like,
Yeah.
now I can kind of understand what AppDynamics does at a high level, but if it was more concentrating on AppDynamics than OSC, that would have helped. OpenShift, and it would have helped me.
So I thought about that. One of the reasons that I didn't do that was because this is a users group.
Right, I was just thinking it's a JBoss users group.
I wanted to be a little sensitive. So the idea is to expose you guys, and that's why I did some of the slides. Right. Talk about APM as a whole a little bit, and try not to be too focused on just what AppDynamics does. But that's good feedback.
For me, it was very
I would
well.
like to.
Good.
I like it a lot.
I liked it because you kind of started with OpenShift.
Right, and that was
I don't have so much background in OpenShift, so it was very well.
So if you you're interested in, you want to put AppDynamics in your app, send me an email.
Okay. But so this on GitHub, so I can probably figure out how to do it just by looking at your source code then.
Yep.
And I'm local here. And
Yeah.
I've got guys who are almost like Steve. They're locally. Steve's pretty impressive. But we've got some great technical resources here too that can help you guys out.
Yeah, when you were up there, I mentioned that if anyone wants a deeper technical dive, we can get that hooked up for anyone. So.
I come
My card as
across
well.
situations where the clients who are asking for, who are working on OpenShift, they were specifically interested in AppDynamics and how it works.
Yeah.
Right? And being part of the POC team, luckily I was not, by that time I was not trained fully, so I was not being put onto that.
Okay.
But when we get into those situations where they are specifically interested in AppDynamics stuff on top of OpenShift, is there any contact on your end that you can get involved at that point of time? So the POC or stuff. Do you have anyone who can help with the
Absolutely. And Brian, sorry. So question is, sorry, your name was Mir. Yeah. So Mir, when he's working on OpenShift proof of concept with his customers, he's had scenarios where they specifically said, I want to use AppDynamics in OpenShift. And I'm working with people in Austin, the exact same situation right now.
Yep.
Who's his point of contact? Reach out.
You can call me and I can get the right engineer lined up because we've got things broken out. But yeah, you can contact me and we'll be right on it.
What will also help me is a little bit of more hands-on deep dive into AppDynamics.
Yeah, sure.
Specifically this, what are we talking about? If I can do it as well on my machine, on my own installation of OpenShift, then it makes a lot of sense when I come across this kind of a requirement from my client's perspective, then I can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Are you guys open in Texas?
I'm here.
So
I used to do some work with Shadowsoft, and So when I joined AppDynamics, I sent these guys an email and said, hey, you should see this technology, it's badass. And they're like, yeah, we're partners. So,
really, but once people get in there, there's so many different things you can find a way to use it, right? To find flaws in existence. So it's, and what we do is it's a very game-changing technology.
The funny thing is, just anecdotally, when I was looking to come over here, as a sales rep, the worst thing is to have a great story and a product that doesn't work. The most frustrating thing in the world. And I remember they're like, all right, well, let's bring you in. We want to do it, in-person deep dive. And I said, well, wait a second. All due respect, can I talk to a couple other sales reps before we go on this path? I don't want to waste anyone's time. They're like, really? Yeah. But you know, the phone with the reps, and like, dude, this stuff actually works. Like, it works better than anything I've ever seen before. Still skeptical. Joined the company, and my first POC that I did with a large hotel chain. We walked in, installed it, and I see this map create. I'm like, holy cow, it really does work. And the look that I get from people is always like, okay, simple apps, I'm sure it's great, but the overhead's got to kill it, or there's no way that it works as advertised. It's like we're pitching unicorn hair at pixie dust. It literally works, and you don't even need me or an engineer adding it to a customer's system. Yeah. I mean, any application you have, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's hosted by you, whether it's somewhere else hosted, it doesn't matter. You've got access to the console to install the agent.
So, does it have a phone app version?
Yes. From like an Android, iOS?
Yeah.
Does it have it? What are you answering? Can you monitor the mobile device? Or
No. Can I have a mobile version of the controller?
It's in HTML5. So we don't have an app.
Okay, yeah, you just hit a web page, and then, but will it understand that, hey, I'm a phone?
It's like it's
Make it HTML5.
neutral. I don't understand it.
I've never
Does HTML5 do that?
It understands the resolution that it's displaying on.
Okay.
And there's lots of stuff that we didn't jump into just in the time talking about OpenShift. But we have, like I mentioned, we have different classes of agents and user application database. So we can show you from your users coming across browser base or your mobile devices, what pages they're hitting, where they're coming from globally, what experiences they're having across the world. And we can correlate user transactions into the data center as well.
So can you use it to do like analytics?
Also, yeah, and a lot of people do that, and that's part of that at level 3, your APM rockstar is. And so we have a customer that is one of the world's largest movie ticket sales. How do I say that? They sell movie tickets.
Like Fandango?
Like that.
Could be.
And so what they do is they have used the instrumentation to create. There's a function in the platform called real-time business metrics. You can say things like, I have this data, and I'm going to access it through AppDynamics. And what this data is this is number of movie tickets sold, and we measure that per minute. And so then we can say, well, how much revenue is that? And so what this movie ticket company does is they plot performance and availability over revenue. And when they have outages, there's a really cool screenshot that shows, I got this performance hit, and I've got this revenue hit. So then I can correlate performance and availability of my system to my actual revenue. Yeah. So when management starts saying, well, how much did that cost me, right? So you want to buy this tool to manage performance. Well, how much do outages cost me, right? Well, I can tell you that outage just cost you $100,000.
It can also show you that if you want to prioritize development resources towards performance engineering, not just function and feature, we've got, I don't know if you showed the performance by performance or the release by release comparison, but we've got a release by release comparison that will show you performance KPIs and even the architecture between releases so that you can effectively quantify back to management. Hey, look, we had an effort to improve performance by 20%. We actually exceeded that, and here's the improvement. Right?
That's this capability. Is looking at, it's called
Seems like, I
complexities.
mean, you can't just, I mean, you can't just give this tool to somebody. You need big and significant training on it, right?
Well, so it's funny you say that, right? Because if you're going to scratch the surface and leverage, and this is just my opinion of what I've seen with customers, leverage what Steve said about like the level 0, level 1, level 2. The level 1, anyone can pick this up, install it, and get actionable data and be able to do a better root cause analysis without any training. Level 1, you're better off. When you get into level 2, this tool is so feature rich and there's so much you can do with it that you definitely want to be engaged with the user groups and the technical account managers and actually learn more about it, because there's so much that our customers, we are actively getting them to use it. That's the point, is we want them to be successful and we want you guys to continue to use it. And it's a rabbit hole. You can get deeper and deeper, and stuff you pull out, people are like,
So I'll tell you really quick. My first experience, the first POV I did, the organization really large scale health as a service vendor, big customers, big money. They're about a $750 million business. And they wanted to run their POV in production, which we do all the time. When I came on board, I was like, dude, that's nuts. Like, I've never seen any customers run software proof of concepts in production. We do it all the time. So the only window that we could get was St. Patty's Day night, 10:30, because all the other windows were booked during our POV. So we installed 10 agents, took 22 minutes. By the time the first one was installed, by the time the last one was installed, the first one was already reported that data and they were solving problems. The VP of operations comes in the next morning and they have a customer outage, and our meeting is at 1:30. He jumps on the tool at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you can see, okay, there's a red light, right? I'm going to click on it. Right? Okay, there's another one. I'm going to click on that. He's a vice president. He diagnosed a production outage. He said, our data center's fine. It's your problem. Customer looked into it more, and it turned out to be a misconnected firewall on their end. And after he was able to do that with no training in 30 minutes,
he's not really a technical guy.
I mean, he's a smart guy, but he's a VP. He's a VP of operations. So, I mean, he's not effective. And after that, I think the deal kind of sold itself. Then, as we were wrapping up the POV, the guy who installed the product goes, hey, I gotta tell you something. He goes, I was shit-faced when this started. St. Patty's Day night. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, this is my job. So, it really does. And I think you're right. I think there's different levels. There's different capabilities. Like, out of the box, really easy to pick up. You put this in front of an operator or a level 1 support engineer. It's like, oh, there's a red light. Right. I guess.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.